I'm John Atack. This is my very good friend and colleague, Bonnie Woods.
Hello.
How are you today, Bonnie?
I'm very good. I have my granddaughter is Kendra Madison Love, and she's autistic, but she says to her mother that her mother doesn't understand her because Nana and I live in the magical kingdom, and she does. So she's persuaded her mother to take her to the magical kingdom 4 times. So the last time she went to the magical kingdom, she brought me this Donald Duck shirt.
Can't be bad.
Which I love, and a Mickey Mouse backpack.
Wow.
Which is very helpful. It's the original Mickey Mouse too. So anyway, the reason I was wanting to speak about baby watching is I realized the other day that I've been parenting for 40 years. Because my grandchildren are now 22 and 20. And then, of course, I have Adriana and Desi. Desi's 41 or 42, one of those. And Adriana she's in her 30s. So then I thought, well, that's a lot of baby watching. But then I got thinking about the other kind of baby watching.
Okay, could you want to explain to our viewers what the other kind of baby watching is?
Well, the other kind of baby watching, the first experience I had with that was around 1977. I came back to St. Louis having done those ridiculous OT levels. Anyway, I came back to St. Louis and they thought, oh, she should be the chairman of the committee, the OT committee.
OT committee.
And I was supposed to make L. Ron Hubbard. I was also the director of the Apple schools, and that was another job. But I was supposed to make L. Ron Hubbard's works, in a favorable light in the community. Ridiculous task, will never happen. But, fair enough. Anyway, another operating Phaeton at a very high level who'd been involved in Dianetics since 1950s. And she and her husband were, I don't know, class 8, whatever. But she was a very gregarious sort of person, a big woman, quite influential within those circles. Anyway, she had what I would now understand to be a psychotic break. So they called me, because she was fond of me, to go to her house and sort her out. So I got to her house. She had 2 young children who were about 5 and 7. And when I arrived at the house, she was in the kitchen brandishing a rather large butcher knife and saying, it was time for the children to go to another place and with her and probably me. And so I said, well, why don't we have a chat? Fully knowing that the Introspection Rundown requires you to be muzzled or silent in the real world. But I thought, well, that's not going to work, and nobody else is here. So I tried to call up people to come and get the children, and they said, well, maybe in the morning, Bonnie, but we're sleeping at the moment. So I got the children into their room and made sure that they were upstairs and proceeded to talk to her in the kitchen, which then I persuaded her to have a cup of coffee after cup. And that went on for probably till the next morning at least, when someone finally came to rescue the children. And then there was 24-hour watches until they whisked her off to Flag. That was kind of a mild case, though, compared to some of the other baby watching that, we got involved with.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the case I particularly remember from St. Hill was a woman called Lee Johnston.
Yeah.
As I recollect, she'd had a baby who at this time was about 2, and the baby had some sort of heart problem.
Oh.
And Lee Johnston was born into a Scientology family, and she became distressed. And she was baby watched by a woman called Ivis Bolger. I never met Lee Johnston, but I did know Ivis Bolger. And the idea is that if somebody is experiencing acute psychosis, a psychotic break, or if they are suicidal, they are baby watched. And in this case, I think it was the Sunday Express or the Sunday Mirror worked on this story for months, putting it together, but eventually published nothing. And Lee Johnson did end up taking her own life.
Yeah.
But the newspaper were frightened. I've still somewhere got the correspondence from the lawyers threatening the newspaper, and they decided they didn't need the trouble. And it always stayed with me that this was a case that, you know, it needn't have happened, it shouldn't have happened. And if it had been dealt with competently, it wouldn't have happened. And because it was handled in this, as you say, you have the introspection rundown, which is the idea that until somebody's going to be nice to you, you don't talk to them. And this was Hubbard's great breakthrough in curing insanity, that you send them to Coventry.
Yeah. Do you remember we went to when the facilities for mental health in Hayward Heath were still in that Victorian building, and we went to visit that man who had a psychotic episode in East Grinstead.
Yeah.
And I found him in his flat. Well, what actually happened was the police called me and they said, Bonnie, can you come to this flat? Because there's someone that we don't know what to do with. And I said, well, okay, fine. So we got to the flat in East Grinstead. I can't remember that road. But when I got there, there were 2 young policemen with me, but there was a whole group of Scientologists outside the flat. So I said, well, this is all well and good, and I understand. And they said, well, the GP is inside, and he wants to know if you'll come because he doesn't know what to do. And I said, well, I'm happy to come in. However, these people here are irritating me, so can you make them go away? So they said, could you please leave? And they said, well, we're here for one of our parishioners. And they said, we don't care what you're here for, on your bikes. Yeah. So that was fine, well and good. Richard was doing his usual bodyguard thing he does. So he was behind me. We got into the flat, and that poor man was in a terrible state. And I don't think he'd had anything to eat or drink. The GP was, for some time, the GP was very concerned about him. And I said, well, let me have a chat. So I pulled up 2 chairs in their favorite position, which he was interested to sit down facing me. And then I started to talk to him, and he immediately got up and said, this is bull bait, and he slapped me. Well, Richard came across the room, and I said, he's fine, leave him. So I said, fine, whatever. So I said, okay, that's good, pass. And so then, I said, would you like a drink of water? And he said, well, yes. So then we had a drink of water. Then I went outside and talked to the GP. He said, I don't know what to do. I said, well, I think he needs to be in a secure place, because if you don't take him there, something else will happen and he'll go somewhere where we can't really help him much. So they took us to the police cells, and I was down in the police cells. And one of our favorite solicitors came with a group of people saying, she's in there, we know she's in there. And the police sergeant said, oh, I don't think so. We wouldn't let anyone from the public go into the police departments. And he said, well, we think she is. And he said, no, not happening. In the meantime, we had to have a psychiatric nurse, I believe, a consultant, and a social worker to get him into a nice, secure place. So they got the social worker and the psychiatric nurse. That wasn't too hard, but the consultant was a problem. But he was golfing.
Of course, doing important things.
He was Spanish. He was delightful. So we finally got a hold of him, and he came in and he said, Bonnie, I was golfing. I said, I know, I'm sorry. And he said, well, I'm going to talk to him. And then he said to the police, but I'm not going in there unless she comes. So we went in there, and eventually we got him into that facility. And then I think you and I visited him there. But his mother came and got him, didn't she, after about 3 or 4 days?
Yeah, something like.
She was released to his mother's care yet again. So who knows where that one went. I seem to have a whole history of them in East Grinstead. There was the German girl who jumped out the window without her clothes, unfortunately, into the back garden of number 1 Delaware Road.
Delaware Road, yeah.
That should be a horror movie. Number 1 Delaware Road. Actually, she got taken to a secure unit, and I went in to visit her there, and we contacted her family in Germany, and they came over, and it took quite a long time to get her back to Germany. And I don't know what happened to her.
No.
Then I have one in Birmingham that I used to go once a week on the train to visit. That was a long visit for that. And his mother and father made us corned beef sandwiches, not real corned beef, other corned beef.
Yeah, the funny stuff that the English buy that comes in tins from Argentina.
Yeah, we gave it to the homeless people. But it took all day to get there and get home, to have, a couple hours.
Yeah.
I think you might have met him. He went to London eventually. But he was in a very, very old facility in Birmingham. And when I got there, they said, "We don't think you'll be any use to this man because he's catatonic." I said, "Oh." I said, "Okay, well, maybe I'll just go and sit next to him." And they said, "Yeah, that would be all right." So I sat next to him, and he was saying nothing. They said he's been here for 6 months. Now, that was very sad because he wasn't referred to me because they'd gone through FAIR, is that right? FAIR.
Family Action Information and Rescue, FAIR, yeah.
Yeah, well, FAIR had a little difficulty with my devotion to the Lord Jesus. So they said no to his family. They told his family there was no one who could help. Unfortunate, really, considering they should have gotten over that problem. I did try to explain. I did try to explain.
Yeah, I tried to explain too that when we were working together,
I know Christians.
People would get this funny attitude because you and Richard were Christians. And it was sort of, look, we're really not involved in that. We're really not trying to convert anybody to or from anything. We're just here to try and help people. So you and I always, worked well together. We never had any problems.
Never.
But there was this kind of religion phobia. And which I've met very often. I'm an agnostic. I'm no fixed belief, as you know. But I don't have any problem with people being atheists or people believing, and I know you don't either. The point is basically if there's somebody in front of you who needs to be helped, then you're a humanist. You're not a secular humanist, you're not a religious humanist. You're just somebody who likes human beings and wants to help. And the tragedy is that often we knew how to help and we knew how to do something immediately. Whereas, as you say, this poor guy has sat around for 6 months not being helped because you're a Christian.
Well, I said to his father somehow got to me. His father just kept going until someone said, well, maybe Bonnie Woods would come. And so I sat down next to him, and his psychiatrist and I had about a half an hour meeting. And she said, he will not speak. And I said, it could have something to do with who you are. It may not be his problem. And I said, he probably wouldn't prefer not to speak to you. And she said, well, he hasn't spoken in all that time. I said, well, where is he? Where are we? And who is he surrounded with? And she said, well, you can try if you want. So I sat down next to him, and I started pulling stuff out of my purse to make a demo kit. And I was sitting at the table with the demo kit, and I said, oh, let's have a demonstration of something. And I said, let's talk about what you can see if you look outside. And I started working at the demo kit, and he looked at me and he said, I'll do it. So he was doing it. And then we started talking, and the psychiatrist came back in, and she said, this is this is not what I expected. I said, well, this is the way it is. And I think I traveled back and forth up there for about 6 months, and then he ran away and ran up to London. And gratefully, an Indian taxi driver picked him up off the street, homeless, and took him home and took care of him, and eventually got him admitted to a psychiatric hospital in London. And then he wrote my name down for them and telephone number, and so they called me and I went up to London. That was difficult because they were very convinced that he had the right to come and go. And because he could be so lucid, sometimes he would just take off.
Yeah.
And he would come back. And I think that happens anyway, but I think eventually he went back to college and got all sorted out, which was a positive thing. Like, I mean, it was a case. Oh, I got a call from sister on a Saturday morning saying, my brother's just jumped in front of a mainline train. I said, I'm so sorry for your loss. She said, he's fine. He's in the hospital in London.
I mean, the police said it was the first time they'd ever heard of anybody jumping in front of a full-on, full-speed, high-speed train and surviving.
Amazing. All he did was he cut off the end of his little finger and he dislocated his leg completely. So when I got to the hospital in London, his father and I were there, and his father said, he's not speaking to anyone. I said, well, okay, that's fine. And so we went up to see him, and he had written, I'll never forget this, I sat down next to him, and he put this tiny piece of paper in my hand. It was like this. And he said, there's a snake curled up. It said, there's a snake, in the tiniest writing, there's a snake curled up inside me, and it's going to eat me up. I said, that's not good. And he looked at me and he said, no, it isn't. And his father was surprised. So then the young psychiatrist, he was a resident, I'll never forget, he came in, he said, may I speak to you in the hall? I thought, oh, here we go. So I went out and he said, can you sit down and talk to me? I said, okay. He said, we understand he's a Scientologist and I don't know what to do. And the consultant's going to come and he's going to find out that I haven't done anything and he won't talk to me. I said, well, okay, let's see what we can do. So the next week when I came up, he was in traction with his foot up on the traction. And the psychiatrist came out and he said he won't let them take the traction off. I said, why? He said, I don't know. He won't tell us anything. So I went in, I said, what's up? Well, you remember, very, very bright young man.
Very bright.
And oh my goodness, I think he was like a Rhodes Scholar or something in Greek.
Very smart.
Very smart. So I said, what's up? He goes, I'm not keeping this leg. I said, why? He said, it's not mine. I said, okay then. I said, well, okay, that doesn't give us a lot of options. I said, well, what we could do is, I said, I can contact the Raleigh police and see if they found yours.
Yeah.
He said, good idea. And I said, okay, I can try that. I said, there's only one problem with that. I said, that was some time ago, and I don't think that leg's going to be very workable. It's not a workable leg. He goes, oh. I said, what about this leg? Seems somewhat workable. He said, yes, it is a workable leg. And he grabbed hold of the traction thing, and the nurse came in and said, what have you done? I said, I didn't do anything. I said, you just got a workable leg. And the psychiatrist said, I don't understand how you came up with that. I said, well, don't ask me. I said, I have a friend. You could ask my friend. He might know what happened. Who knows? And then we saw him at Ticehurst, didn't we?
We did, where King George III was held when he was mad. It was amazing to go to that place, you know.
Oh, gosh, yeah.
Having watched the movie, you know.
But I would expect he was probably doing fine.
I imagine so. And it exemplifies a problem. I remember talking to the staff at Haywards Heath, and they asked me over one evening, and I gave a talk, and I was very surprised. There were 14 members of the staff there. Now, these are people who do work very long hours, and I thought, maybe one or two of them would turn up. Also, of course, having been fed all of this stuff about how evil psychiatry is and
Sure.
how rotten these people are, the amount of care and concern in that room was a surprise to me. And what had happened was they'd had a guy there who'd, gone wild on OT3, which they told me happens a couple of times a year, that they get somebody who comes in and they're in an acute psychosis. This guy was screaming and yelling. He was defecating and rubbing it over the walls. He would hit anybody that came into the room. He was in a very bad way. And I sat there and I talked, about what OT3 is and what the effects will be, and that with somebody who's, because they are so phobic about psychiatry, and I can certainly understand some of that, it's not, it is a strange profession, but it's really wound up so that they're then thrown into a psychotic situation. But as you said with the guy up in Birmingham, they've been put in the camp of the enemy. They're not going to cooperate. So I said, you can't give them any drugs. They will take against that. They'll think that, and they'll be in opposition to you. So, and they were very good about that. And later, I had a guy referred to me who had been found sat in his car by the side of the road on what we call the hard shoulder, the extra lane on a motorway. And what do they call those in America? The hard shoulder, what's it called when you've got a lane that you can pull over into at the side of the road, but people don't normally drive in?
I don't know. I don't think we have them in a lot of roads.
What uncivilized people.
I mean, we are on our highways. You have to wait till you get to a proper place. You can't just do it on the highway.
Okay.
I mean, it's quite good that you have those.
Well, it can be useful if somebody's in trouble and they need.
Especially,
But anyway, the police found him sat in his car, jabbering away to someone or something, and I think he explained that it was a 2 billion-year-old parrot that was actually L. Ron Hubbard in another lifetime or something like that. And
that could have been true.
Yeah, it was true. And he'd spent, I think...
Poor parrot.
Poor parrot. Pretty Polly. And he'd spent about 6 weeks and they'd just run out of things to do. And so they sent him to me. And it really just took a couple of hours to go, well, what happened? And he explained what had happened. And we had a conversation and, he was okay for a few weeks after that. The only thing I warned him about was that he really shouldn't go anywhere near Scientology or indeed anything like it.
Yeah.
That it would, temperamentally, he was not suited to this.
Exactly.
And he decided that he was going to do it anyway. And a poor friend of mine who was an independent Scientologist got him. And I did try to warn her, but she was sure, the tech can.
Oh, yeah.
And fortunately, he did not do significant damage to himself, but he tried to cut his own throat.
Oh.
It was just that, unfortunately, when you start using guided imagination, let's call it that you can throw people into these states of mind. And if you tell them they're inhabited by thousands of little beings, that doesn't help. But a lot of it is just that, you or I, we sit down with a person, they start talking to us, and we understand what they're talking about.
Exactly. Yeah. And I tend to find that in life in general. If I'm listening to someone, I feel that that's their worldview. They're entitled to feel or think or consider whatever they would like to consider. I try to be non-judgmental about most things. It's not up to me to judge whether or not that makes any sense to you. It clearly made sense to
Yeah.
And there was no arguing with him about whether trying to get him to understand anything real that was happening. The idea was to get him to cooperate so that he could get better, basically.
Yeah, which and it's facilitating, you know, him mending his own mind. The thing I particularly remember with him is that he sort of lived half in a nightmare during
He
that period. And I remember him talking about Hitler and turning into a ladybird. Those are the two things that.
Yeah. Whoa, come down.
Yeah,
It's
and
good that he,
you
it's good
sat
that he
with him.
spoke English to us instead of Greek, though, because that would have been harder.
That would have been difficult. It would all have been Greek.
Yeah. I think the thing that really I'm really concerned about, and I think baby watching is just, we just see the baby watch cases, and goodness knows, my husband says that he believes there's so many things that go on that we're not aware of. He calls them the bodies under the floorboards.
Yep.
And I think he's right. I think there's a lot that goes on that we just never do find out. But I think that baby watching is the ones that are actually manic enough or happen across someone who notices in their family, or someone becomes aware of it. The ones that worry me the most are the ones like my young man, Jeff White. Jeff White was going to be a witness in my case, and Jeff White had gotten involved with Scientology in Bournemouth and Poole. And I had gone to see him. He was living in Bath, and we had gone with my solicitors to take his statement because I think he'd spent $50,000 in a very short period of time. And that was when one of those solicitors was quite successful at getting it back, getting the money back. So Jeff did get the money back, but he was wanting to testify about his experiences in Scientology, which he did, and they took his statement. And of course, because Scientology settled and said sorry, then I didn't have to go to court. But Jeff was very willing to help, and he was a lovely young man. And when, I think it was quite a few years, 8 years later, I had a phone call from his father one morning, and his father said, "I'm Jeff White's father." I said, "Oh, it's nice to talk to you." And he said, "I didn't know my son was involved in Scientology." He said, "And he's committed suicide. And he has left a manuscript with your name clipped to the manuscript." So I have that manuscript, and I intend to publish it. Well, parts of it at least, because I call them the haunting silent voices, because they're the voices that haven't been heard.
Yep.
And those are the ones I care about most.
Yeah.
You know, like Noah Loddick or Lisa McPherson. You know, the ones that no one knows about. But it strikes me interesting because he wrote 36 pages, and he put the manuscript in the car on the windshield, on the dashboard, right before he died. And he says, 8.5 years on from the first time I came across Dianetics and Scientology, matters have at last turned in my favor. I began to take legal action in May 1995, and after a very stressful 2 years, I won. Once the ball had started rolling, I began to come out of the closet and gradually speak to people about my experience. For all those years, there were a lot of friends and associates who I was too embarrassed to tell, and my family never knew what was going on at all. Now that my personal battle is over with Scientology, another one is emerging. Mentally, I've been trying to deal with confusion, angst, and I believe I will probably need some help with this. I am left with a sense of no direction, plus a lack of enthusiasm to find one, and can get deeply depressed.
Yeah.
And this is right before he takes his own life. So my concern is there could be long periods of time when people are leaving. and the emphasis seems to be on, oh, the horrible stories that the media love. And this is a tragic story for sure. But there doesn't seem to be an emphasis on they're coming out. But that's only the tip of the iceberg. I mean, they could be walking around with these states of mind. And I just wish that, former members would concentrate their energies on how to help the recovery.
Well, they need to fulfill their own recovery first. And
well, yeah.
That's really a problem. I mean, let me say that the suicide rate in Scientology was something that very much caught my interest. And, from the point that I left, I started to feel that the suicide rate was much higher than that around us. And so way back when I was involved with FactNet, when it started up in 93 or something, I actually collected a list of, I think it was 38 names of suicides. And as I started to look at it and look at what the normal, demographic, how many people normally commit suicide in society, having a more realistic grasp of the actual number of Scientologists, which was always in the tens of thousands, never in the millions, this was a very high suicide rate, probably about 10 times the UK average. And I heard about, there were many cases I couldn't follow up. Betty Tilden, the psychiatrist, she had a case where some parents called her and said their daughter had committed suicide. She was about 19 or something. And they'd found a personality test, Scientology personality test, the Oxford Capacity Analysis. And this is what had driven her to death. She'd done a personality test and she'd been told that she was a complete mess. Now, the secret in the evaluation of the personality tests, which you only see if you get the manual, and you won't get that unless you're inside the group.
Because I was normally trained at that,
Yeah, if you score above what is called the death line by Hubbard.
No, don't put that down.
If you score above it, you must be marked below it to the same percent. So when one of my first things in Scientology, I still have it somewhere, was I did a personality test, and Linda Harrington, at Birmingham, who evaluated it, said this strange thing. She said, "I'm not going to mark you down." And it was only 10 years later when I saw the manual that it clicked. Because my personality test ran kind of 80 to 90% along the top, because I'm a fairly cheerful human being, I suppose. So she would have marked me down to minus 80 or 90%. That's what's happened to this young woman. And that was distressing enough, and had been delivered with enough authority about how much money she was going to have to find and could never find, that she'd killed herself. What a malign influence, and with absolutely no understanding of people's mental health. No understanding when you're presented with somebody who is exhibiting, as you say, mania, or they're profoundly depressed, or they're highly anxious. No understanding of that at all, so that you may then do something to them, which, as it did with the young man who had the parrot talking, it just drives them round the bend. It just pushes them that little bit further.
And I think when they come out, because of the nasty aspect of Scientology called responsible for condition, that ultimately you are the person that is responsible for that condition. So throughout Jeff's manuscript, you see this continual thread of, Roger K told me I had to be responsible for my condition. It was my fault. And he'd had a horrendous personality test evaluated. I mean, he'd spent $50,000 and he'd never gotten beyond, I don't know, the first steps.
Life repair.
Yeah, I think so. But I think the whole concept of, and I understand the idea of an aftermath foundation, but I think you have to deal with the aftermath, and I'm not convinced. I found it very painful to watch because I was thinking, who's picking up the pieces when you turn off the camera?
Yeah, you set all of this stuff up. Now, what are you going to do to help?
Now what happens? Where are those people now?
Here's the division that the psychiatric profession and generally the counselling professions have no idea whatsoever to do with these people. You
Yeah.
and I, who do have some idea, are excluded, because the one essential feature of Scientology is know best, that you are
Yeah.
taught that you know better than anybody else. Your kind of narcissistic self-satisfaction is preened for you, and you become the only one, in Hubbard's terms, the only one
Yeah.
who really understands. So ex-Scientologists are incredibly resistant to any insight or correction. Not, of course, that changes with time, and there are many incredibly insightful ex-members. I got on the wrong side of Jerry Armstrong for suggesting
Oh,
that Chris
yeah.
Shelton had, didn't have the arrogance to
Yeah.
believe himself all-knowing, so that when
Yeah.
he left, he was one of those few people who said, "I don't think this stuff works. I need to understand it." Whereas most people are reluctant to let go of it, and the last thing that you let go of is the sense of your own superiority and of knowledge. And so
Sure.
when somebody like Bonnie Woods or John Atack comes along and says, there might be some things you don't know about this, it's sort of, I
Yeah.
know everything I need to know.
Yeah.
And
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it's a normal part of our society anyway, the sense of invulnerability. Advertising
Yeah.
works on other people, but I know it doesn't work on me,
Yeah.
and that's amplified, as just about anything that's wrong with somebody will be amplified in Scientology, so that there is no sense of needing to heal, needing to overcome what has actually been a
Yeah.
very careful piece of psychological manipulation that has restructured your mind so that you are your own enemy.
Exactly. And that's the thing that is like a minefield.
Yeah.
And it could go years before maybe something would trigger it off.
Well, we
That
talked about the guy who came from Australia, and he'd been
was wonderful. That
he'd
was a
been
wonderful experience.
housebound for 20 years, and his wife said, "We're going back. We're going to confront the place where it happened, which was Saint Hill." So he came out of the house for the first time in 20 years, came over, stayed with a friend of mine who said, "Have you read John's book?" And he said no. And he sat and I think he read it in one session. I think he just sat and read it.
Yeah.
And, rang me up, and the next day there he was. And I was furious. This thought that this really, really decent man, because he'd been told that he was a suppressive person and because he didn't want to hurt anybody, had actually
Oh,
withdrawn himself from society.
yeah.
And finding the way that people have been bullied into thinking that L. Ron Hubbard really knew something, and really did have anything at all, had something that really helped mankind, where he himself was quite evidently a malignant narcissist. He was a man who loathed other people, who shouted at them and bullied them. But that becomes this idol, this awful.
Well, do you remember when we had that wonderful incident with that young girl from Australia and her brother came over and helped us in the intervention?
The Scoutmaster.
And he was such a lovely, lovely guy.
He was.
And there she was, and you were showing her that clip about overboarding, and she was trying to explain to him that Hubbard needed to do that because he needed to get ethics in.
Yeah.
And he burst into tears and said, "I can't believe you're talking like this. What is wrong with you?" And something just caught her. I think that is the thing that is probably the most dangerous, is whatever that happens, like a pearl, where there's all of that pearl is still there, and then there's all this covering it over and covering it over, and it's the jewel of their life is kind of buried in all this morass of goodness knows what, which I don't think Hubbard even had any understanding what he was doing to people. Maybe somewhat, but I don't know what you think about that.
I think he was.
I don't think he cared what it did, really, but
I think he was very divided against himself. I've come to the point of view that he was a solipsist. He wasn't simply a narcissist. He was somebody who thought that the world was his imagined reality. That we were just, when he talked about being the game maker and said, the the pieces mustn't know the rules. The
Mm.
players know the rules but must keep them hidden from the pieces. And the game maker, of course, doesn't follow the rules at all, which is in the Philadelphia Doctorate course in 1952. And it's such an open statement about who he was and what he was doing. There's another one where he talks about a story written by Lord Dunsany, the Victorian writer, about the fall of a monastery after 1,000 years, and it was predicted it would fall on this day, and this guy wanders up from the village and none of the guards stop him. He's allowed to keep on going, and you know, Shaggy Dog story, it keeps on going through various rooms until he comes to the Holy of Holies, where the power is that has maintained the monastery for 1,000 years, and he pulls back the curtain and there's nothing there. And I can remember reading a transcript of this lecture when I, you know, not so long after I got involved, and going, is he trying to tell me something?
Exactly.
And he was.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think he had, I mean, the way that he threw Mary Sue Hubbard away, that she went to prison for him and he then wouldn't communicate with her. The way that he cut off all of his own children at one point or another. The absolute selfishness of the man, the bullying way that he behaved towards people. I think he felt ill and unhappy. I mean, one of the themes throughout the 1950s is this thing, terror stomach. That when you read into the material, and there's a lot of stuff about how to cure terror stomach.
Oh, yeah.
And this, of course, is his ulcers. This is his constant indigestion, you know. That so he was in pain, he was unhappy. And the technology was there were two things he was trying to do. The first is cure himself. And every 6 months he'd think he'd found out how to do that, and then it didn't work, so he'd keep going and do some more. And the other thing was, Tony Ortega published a letter which I've actually had for a very long time. I didn't realize you don't think about what people might or might not know when you've collected hundreds of thousands of documents. But it's a letter written in 1949 from Savannah, Georgia, where he was staying with Major Arthur J. Burks in the Marines. And he wrote to Forry Ackerman, who was his literary agent, who he called 4E, Forry. And Forry gave us all of the correspondence from Hubbard. And he was his literary agent for decades, you know.
Yeah.
And here is this thing with Hubbard boasting that he's written this manuscript which has more selling angles than anything he's ever thought of. And by the use of the techniques, you could actually rape a woman and she would know nothing about it. And you're kind of going, there's nothing in here about Dianetics helping people. It's a way of making money, and it's a way of getting away with rape.
Oh, so my word.
That was the other aspect of the technology, that, you know, he'd understood that he could manipulate people. But I think he was divided against himself. He was trying to heal himself and failing. And so as with any narcissist, he didn't have a complete self. He didn't have any love. He didn't know how to love. And so he needed adulation from people to believe himself to be real, and, you know, drank and took a lot of drugs, smoked 100 cigarettes a day, and was generally a loathsome creature behind closed doors, you know, and smiling and happy, you know, in front of everybody.
Well, it was interesting to me having met Quentin, because Quentin came to St. Louis when I was the director of public servicing, so it was my job to take care of Quentin. I think when I met Quentin, Quentin loved two things. Quentin loved airplanes. So there was a place in St. Louis that has a lot to do with aircraft history and airplanes and things.
The Spirit of St. Louis.
So I managed to get him an opportunity to go visit. It had a museum. So I managed to do that for him, and he was very happy. And the millionaire that I had recruited into Scientology happened to be very, very interested in international folklore. And in his attic, which was completely humidified and everything, he had the most fantastic collection of costumes, including a Chinese Ming Dynasty kimono, and he took Quentin up to the costume room, and he said, "We can
put the kimono on."
Yeah, well, any costume he wanted, he could try on. But what was interesting is he chose that one And I thought Steve would never say yes because
Ming Dynasty, yeah.
but he let him wear it. And it was just wonderful to see him as just a gentle young man. You know, it must have been, maybe that tour was maybe only the happiness Quentin had. Because he was, you know, locked up on the ship a lot of times and made to do the class 12 thing twice, which was
well. Apparently, this didn't happen. Dennis Ehrlich was the case supervisor, and he said no.
Yeah.
He was ordered to do it, but he didn't do it.
He didn't.
Which led Monica Pignotti to say, "If John is wrong about this thing, how can we trust anything he says?"
Oh well, Monica.
Which my answer is, there are 1,100 reference notes in A Piece of Blue Sky. Check them. You know?
Yeah, go ahead.
But I was told by a senior official of Scientology, as you too have heard, that Quentin did everything, in fact, all of the OT levels and the right through to class 12, the highest level of auditor. I think there are only ever 24 class 12s. He did it twice. I was told that by a senior executive. Dennis Ehrlich, who was his actual case supervisor, tells me it's not so. And so he was ordered to redo the bridge, but he had done the whole bridge, and he was a prisoner. You know, he was, you know, in the mid-60s, when he was just a little boy, his father had said, "He will be my successor. He will take this over from me." And, you know, for anybody who doesn't know, Quentin committed suicide. Of course, there is some argument as to whether he was murdered by QAnon or somebody, but I've seen the death certificate. I've talked with people around it. I'm, you know, it fits together. Carbon monoxide poisoning.
Well, I think, who is I forgot his name, the man who covered it over for the Guardian's office, who died, Stacy's husband.
Robert Vaughan Young.
Yeah, he was the one who was in charge of burying the story. And he tells of the fact that Quentin was unsuccessful. So he was actually in a coma for some time before he died in the hospital.
Yeah, several days.
Yeah. So even at that, he was unsuccessful in the way that he wanted to be successul.
Yeah.
But then, of course, Hubbard's reaction to it.
Yes, this will mean bad publicity. What's he done? That kind of thing.
Yeah.
Mary Sue Hubbard broke down and cried. You know, at least she was. But there you are. Solipsism is his own son who's died, and he's, this is going to cause me trouble. You know.
Well, that kind of fits with Miscavige's reaction to Lisa McPherson. People die, and the treatment of the staff at Gold. You know, the absolute making them negligible. Really, not important.
Not important, and it is an interesting transition. I would love to meet David Miscavige, because having interviewed so many people who know him, and I mean, the first comment I had about him was from Didi Vogading, who had been the chairman of the Watchdog Committee and therefore the real deputy to L. Ron Hubbard running Scientology. I was her, and I suppose Laurel Sullivan was. It's difficult to know with all of the lines that he had running, but she was the head of the Commodore's Messengers. And she said that when he was assigned to her, when he was, I don't know, about 17 or something, in the late 70s, 17, 18, that the thing about him was that if you needed something doing, he would do it. And I'll never forget what she said to me. She said, so for example, if you needed a wall knocking down, he would lower his head and charge. He would straight away get it done.
Yeah.
And that sort of will, that kind of determination, it has driven him all the way along here. But he's uneducated, you know, because his dad decided that all he needed as an education was Scientology from the age of 13. He's ill-informed about the world. His understanding of the world comes through Scientology. I really wonder about his state of mind. You know,
well, it'll be interesting to see. The only profile of someone actually witness his pretty current behavior would be this girl with the law case in America Now, who was his maidservant. she will have much to say. But they see, they're very adept at those things. Very rarely get to court. But these particular law firms, I think there's 5 or 6 of them, who are actually representing Jane Doe's, but one of them has identified herself now.
Yes.
In order to get a deposition done, I think, or to get something done legally, she's had to come out. But there's more than one law firm involved now in that whole idea of that litigation. But it's always curious to me, because my law firm was one of the best in the world.
Yeah.
And they would have been in court. But the law suggests, even in this country, that if the person is willing to settle, it's very difficult to get beyond that point. And when they said to me, Bonnie, what are your terms? I said, well, I'm not so much concerned about the money. And I had to pick a figure. So I was 50. So I said, well, 50 be good. I said, but it'll have to be 55 because I need to tithe to some charities and ministries that I really care about. So it was 55. And I said, actually, what I really want is the public apology. Yeah. And the Queen's Counsel said, Bonnie, I can't dictate that. That's not one of the terms of libel. The person can pay you, but they don't have to say sorry. And they don't even have to admit if they're willing to pay you off. They don't even have to admit culpability. They don't even just say, yeah, I did say that and I shouldn't. Yeah. So I said, well, I don't care because they should say sorry.
Yes.
And my Queen's Counsel said, okay. So Michael Tugendhat, who's now a judge, a wonderful person he is, he said, I'll tell them so. They can have a choice. We can carry on. Next week, next Tuesday, we'll be ready to go, or they can say sorry.
Yeah.
And that's all I cared about, really. And I wanted that apology for not just me, but for everybody. But I don't think, I would love to see a litigation get to its culmination, to actually get a precedent. Because, I have a precedent. I have undertakings. I have one undertaking that I can't publish, but I can talk about. Because my young barrister they said, well, we don't want her. We want her to sign a non-disclosure. And she just Alex laughed. She said, you do know, you have spoken to her before. And she said, no, we will agree that she won't print it on a piece of paper. She won't publish it, but if she wants to talk to someone about it.
You want to tell John about it, he can.
Yeah, I can tell John about it. But it's my fondest wish, I think. I'm not like yourself. I'm much more interested in other things. I am very interested in anything that would help people recover.
Yeah.
That's always been our focus anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. From the beginning.
Even no matter what we were trying to do, that was our main focus in life. It's helping people recover. I remember going to Norfolk, wherever that place is, and meeting someone in their lounge. When I came through the front door, he said, who are you? And I said, Bonnie Woods. He said, you're in jail. I said, no, sorry. I'm not actually in jail. I'm here. It took him a little while to realize. That was when I thought, whoa, this is really serious now. But I'm hoping, because if we're going to talk about an aftermath, then we better talk about recovery. And the focus should shift soon, I hope, from cataloging all the terrible things, because we all know what they were. But I would like to see it shift to what you're working so hard on now. But I can't see it happening too quickly.
I contacted Leah Remini before anything.
Me too, but nothing.
Well, I got a reply. I sent a copy of Let's Sell These People a Piece of Blue Sky. Shameless self-promotion there. And I got a charming handwritten full-page letter back. And so I thought, well, okay. And I sent a copy of Opening Minds, because if you put those two things together, that should be most of the recovery basics are in there. Understanding who Hubbard was, what Scientology was actually about, how the tricks work. I mean, I had a dear friend who better remain nameless, who was a Ron Hubbard aide, who was a commanding officer of various Scientology organizations and mega organizations. And he, he's well versed in psychology and this sort of thing since he left. We left at about the same time back in '83. But so I sent him a manuscript of Opening Minds, just with the thought that because he's knowledgeable in the area, he could put me right if I misunderstood something, or if I'd failed to explain something properly. And I was amazed to get an email back from him saying that he finally understood what had happened to him in Scientology, because I hadn't written the book from that perspective at all, the perspective of what is in common between all of the groups that exploit people. But the response I got from Leah Remini was telling me that I'd written a lot of books. That was the second note. And I know Steve Hassan said that for the last show of the first season, he was there. And he suggested that Scientology used hypnosis. And he said, Mike Rinder looked at him and went, really? I hadn't thought about that. And he's sort of going, this is a way of controlling your imagination. This is a way of making you feel, that you've got all these past lives and you've got all of this stuff going on, and putting you into this imaginary world. And the way out, what's annoying is the way out of it. If I can sit with somebody for an hour or two, well, you've seen me do it. If I can sit with somebody for an hour or two, I can make them, think about it in a different way. And they then, they don't need thousands of hours of counseling.
Right.
They just need that one switch flipping that says it's okay for them to question anything that Hubbard said. It's okay for them to say, well, do people, the only reason that people give up a study or feel confused is the misunderstood word. Is that true? And again, well, Hubbard said it's also too steep a gradient, suppressive rendition, these various other things. So no, it's not true. And getting up that sense of authority where they are the authority on what they think, rather than Hubbard or Plato or anybody else, Nietzsche or anybody else, that they come to make the decisions. I think people expect that if you're involved in recovery, you're going to do to them something like Scientology. Ben Corridon used to apparently told me that he was exit counselling people by sitting them down with the e-meter. David Mayo told me that he got lists that he used with the e-meter to help, and you're going, no, that's it, you don't use those techniques. You bring somebody to the point where they say, actually, I still like that bit. That seems okay to me, but I think that bit is nonsense. The law can be used very easily to harass. That's true, but affinity and communication don't actually expand together. You communicate with bullets, then affinity is not heightened. But bringing people to to the point where they will then do it themselves. I was surprised when I first met Cyril Vosper, and he told me 14, 15 years after leaving that he still found himself wondering if he'd committed an overt.
Wow.
And I'd be going, Cyril, just did I do something wrong? Should I do something about that? You don't have to, reframe it in Hubbard terms,
I suppose, would you consider that kind of thing, I don't know another word, but I'm thinking like subliminal or below the influence of the techniques permeates somewhere that you're not immediately aware of or something.
Yes, that it is below the level of consciousness. And I think Hubbard himself gives the right, a reasonable explanation when he says that things have been implanted. I think of Scientology as a devious system of implanting. She's full
Yeah.
of contradictions. You can never, never, ever, ever evaluate for the pre-clear, but you don't let the pre-clear become a pre-clear until they know what the definition of pre-clear is. So what we're going to do is clear you. We're not going to evaluate for you about what we're going to do, but we're going to take your engrams away and your secondaries and your locks, and we're going to find basic, and we're going to do this, and there's charge and there's that. So you're told 1,000 things, and one of them is that we're never going to evaluate for you. You know, you're not going to read the OT3 pack before you go looking for body therapies. And it's a lie. It's nothing but a huge evaluation, and it's an evaluation of L. Ron Hubbard's case. You know, I mean, the first lie is that Hubbard absolutely, you know, my paper, Never Believe a Hypnotist, that there's no doubt if you read that it's what he says. It's not what I say, it's what he says, that he practiced hypnosis from the age of 16, he says. It was fundamental to Dianetics because all he did was he changed a word. So instead of talking about a hypnotic mind, he talked about a reactive mind. And then he set about implanting it into people so that they would be reactive rather than analytic. They wouldn't think about things. They'd just do what Ron said. And they'd, you know, once those tram lines of routine are laid down, it's hard to think otherwise. So for me, my escape was very simple. I just one day said, I don't believe any of it anymore, because I know that if I believe one part of it, that I will use that to evaluate the other parts of it. And when I stopped believing anything and said, you know, I'll consider it bit by bit, and I'll, you know, pick up those bits that are useful for me. I'm not denying it. But, you know, the years went by, and now 36 years later, there's none of it that I find useful. I find better explanations of life, you know, even in where he did come close to getting an idea right, you know, like the misunderstood word. It's a good idea to understand what words mean. But the idea that concepts rely solely upon the understanding of words, he also very quietly and just for a moment said there is such a thing as suppressive rendition. So that wouldn't be because you didn't understand the words, it's because you've been lied to in the text. False data, you know, like the false data and false data stripping bulletin that where he talks about Socrates inventing the syllogism, which it was actually Aristotle, guys, which he says in the Phoenix Lectures. He knew it, had known it when he was a younger man, but as an older man, he decided he'd make up this story and tell us about syllogisms and how confusing they are, and attributed it to the wrong author while telling us how to strip false data. And the problem is that if you are only concerned with the words, you're not concerned with the concepts. So you might fully and absolutely understand every word defining some aspect of Scientology without having really looked at what the concept is. And is the concept something that's helpful to people? Does Scientology increase compassion? Is it humanistic? Do you go out and... No, it's about exchange. It's about making sure you get your money's worth. It's about looking after yourself, you know, and becoming a super being and all of that nonsense. It's incredibly and utterly selfish. It clones Hubbard's disturbed personality into people.
It's interesting to me how quickly that can be achieved.
Yes.
You remember when we worked on that Channel 4 documentary with Joe Robinson? And Channel 4 was doing that, I don't know, The Secret Life of L. Ron Hubbard or World or whatever he was in. 3D. Anyway, that was interesting because they were privy to conversations I was having on the phone, which then they were being called by Scientology after they'd spoken to me, and they knew what I'd said. So that was interesting because Channel 4 had enough muscle to go intervene in BT's kind of place where your phone lines are and realize that something was amiss. Which of course they weren't going to listen to me. But anyway, the girl that they chose, that lovely young Australian girl, I remember the first meeting I had with Joe Robinson, I said, you know, She said, oh, Bonnie, we have to write a contract that will protect her. So we want to have a contract of, because she wants a contract about the liability of getting involved in whatever. And I said, well, you're not going to protect her. I said, there's no way you'll protect her. And I said, I can talk to her. I said, I don't think she should do it. I don't think anyone should do that. I don't think anyone should do it. And she said, well, can you talk to her? So I talked to her and I said, at least if you're going to get involved, make it imaginary, have imaginary incidents that you think of. If you insist on doing this, and I don't suggest you do.
It wasn't The Secret Life. This was the big.
What was that one?
The Big Story.
Oh yeah.
Jill made those 2 big story documentaries.
Oh
and
yeah.
Getting a reporter in with a hidden camera, and the concern was that she might be. There's this story about the CIA guy that went in to spy on them and joined them.
Well, she had those impossibly ridiculous glasses. They could have done a better job because they figured it out once she got to St. Hill.
Yeah.
Because they weren't happy enough just letting her experience it a bit. Not like those two cute guys in California that go in and cause havoc. I love those 2. But she went, so I said, don't share anything personal with them. Don't do that.
Yeah.
And then they said, well, will you come to this session where we're going to talk to you about the training routines? I said, no, I don't do training routines and I won't participate. And they had another former member who was willing to drill with her. And they got some guy from MI5. He was a brainwashing expert from the Korean War, quite an older man. And he sat down and said, Bonnie, can you tell me how it works? And I said, I can't tell you exactly because I said, we don't always understand how this works, but this is what I think happens. And he said, well, I'm going to do some and see. He said, I'm supposed to be here on tap to fix her if it goes wrong, if she gets damaged. I said, I don't think that's a good idea either. But anyway, I said, I don't know if that's the best kind of counseling she should have. And I said, myself and I said, my colleague and I said, I'm sure that, we could help if we need to, but we don't really think, I don't think we would think it's a good idea, any of this. Anyway, he sat down and did TR0. And he came back and he said, there's nothing I can do. He said, there's nothing I can do that will, I can't tell them that she isn't going to have long-lasting damage. He said, I've never seen anything like these things.
No, Steve Hassan, when he first had, I think with Jerry and Hannah Whitfield, back in about 1990, demonstrated the training routines for Steve. And he said he'd never seen a more overt use of hypnosis in any group. Routines. It's so quick. And at Toronto, we broke them down, and there's a video on indeed this YouTube channel, free of charge, which has the deconstruction of Scientology technique, which I've often thought was one of the valuable things we did. But getting ex-members to actually be willing to watch and open-minded enough to think about whether what we're saying is true. The resistance to that, which is this problem we were talking about before, is so immense. I don't need to. And it's sort of, look, it's just an hour of your time.
Really.
And if you have actually achieved something psychologically or spiritually, then of course it won't influence you at all. If you are communicate freely with anyone on any subject, then you'll be able to listen to this and go, well, yeah, I don't think that's right, and this is why I don't think that's right. But this incredible defense against anything that might upset you, anything that might, force you to think differently, it's incredible. It's it's not. I mean, it's called confirmation bias or my side bias by psychologists, but it really doesn't. That really doesn't explain how we become so certain of what we believe. I mean, that is to me the absolute nub of the problem, that we become convinced. And without any comment at all about your beliefs, that this is not about your beliefs. But I told the story when I was 17 in a born-again Christian stop me and talk with me on the street for 2 hours, because you know me, I'm a friendly chap. And I wasn't being argumentative. I was quite interested in what he was saying and saying, but what about this bit of scripture? Doesn't that? And he was willing to contend with scripture, which I know you're not meant to do. But
Yeah.
as he decided in the end, he was talking to a brick wall and he wasn't getting anywhere. And he backed away from me, which of itself interested me. He kept looking at me and walked backwards so that I would jump on him.
Fortunately, it wasn't on a high hill or something.
Well, it was on a slight slope. It was opposite Leavesley's garage on Beacon Street in Lichfield, actually. I remember it well. And as he backed away, he said, I don't understand the Bible, but I know it's all true. And that conflict, that stayed with me as a thought from that moment onward. The idea that we can, all of us, and we all do, there are things that we don't understand, but we're convinced are true. And being willing to challenge those things is an aspect of being a grown-up, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, for sure.
And that it, you know, if I wanted to talk with you about the Christian faith, or if I wanted to talk with our friend Jericho, we'd sit and talk about it. And there wouldn't be any assertions of, but Ron says this is what you've got to do, so it must be the right way to do it. They'd be, well, why is it the right way to do it? And we talk about that.
Well, I think that's because probably, you know, my own viewpoint as a committed Christian is that faith is a gift of God. I'm not here to Christianize people.
No.
My job is to be sanctified, hopefully, to be a better person, to be able to, you know, love people despite my own shortcomings, really. So I remember going to give a lecture in that place you and I went not too, well, 13 years ago. How could this be? But we went and talked to that family group. And I remember standing up and talking about something, I don't know, the court case, whatever it was. And someone in the back of the room jumped up and said, how many people have you Christianized? And I started laughing because I said, well, fortunately, that's my job. Not my job. I said, that's not what I do. You know, and even if I wanted to, I couldn't. I said, because I'm of the belief that that is a gift of God and not my job. At which point, Gary Fry jumped up. And at Daphne, our friend Daphne, she just laughed. And you could hear the door flapping. That's all you could hear. And I thought, whoa, you know. So Gary jumped up and he said, I met Bonnie and Richard and I'm a Christian. And this man said, well, maybe you've been Christianized. He said, no, nothing. They couldn't have done that. But he said, but I will tell you that Gary started to talk about being in Scientology. And Gary is a farmer. And they have a fence pole thing that makes fence poles. And it's like a machine.
Yeah, it's to push a fence pole down into the ground.
Yeah. And he'd only been involved with Scientology a very short time, and he got very, very depressed. And he thought about putting his head in that. And that he said to the man, so if these two people hadn't spoken to me and helped me understand what was happening to me, he said I wouldn't be standing here today. So I think that I don't know what it's going to take, but you know, somebody has to wake up to the fact that now with the internet, and fortunately we don't have to keep saying the same things over and over and over again.
One would hope.
One would hope not. But you would think that there would be some idea with a large number of people coming out of Scientology now, a significant number, I understand, who could number it, but certainly more significant than I was used to years ago. But the same things are happening to people within Scientology from a suicidal viewpoint, and you see it in the aftermath that we were dealing with 26 years ago.
Yep.
So, you know, I don't know. Have you ever met any facility or know of any facility for people to get better?
No, I mean, there was a Wellspring, of course, with Paul Martin, and which was general, and we have Hope Valley with Gilly Jenkinson here. But in both cases, my experience, and it happened to me a number of times when I was going to the States in the 80s and early 90s, that I would talk with people at the Cult Awareness Network who would tell me we deal with 2,000 or 3,000 groups, but the only one that, we don't know what to say is Scientology. And indeed, Christian Cherko, who I regard as the most remarkable recovery counselor in the world, bar none. But Christian is very uneasy about Scientologists, that they're different. You're not, when you're dealing with a Jewish, a Christian, a Sufi, or a Buddhist, or the various therapy groups like the Sullivanians, or large group awareness trainings like EST, the Forum Landmark Trust, LifeSpring, all of these things. It's pretty straightforward what you're dealing with. Scientology is so utterly and astonishingly complicated that people, when they try and counsel a Scientologist, start finding themselves wandering in the woods, not knowing quite what's going on. So no, there's never been a proper facility. There was something in Australia, which from the sound of it, was really dreadful. There are, of course, groups thinking of Australia like Kenja, which are sort of would recruit ex-Scientologists, and or the Process, which the son of Sam, David Berkowitz, was involved in the Process, which is the De Grimstons, an offshoot of Scientology.
And the Forum.
Yeah, the Forum Landmark. That people will go there to try and recover from Scientology and just get something else put on top of it.
Absolutely. Oh. Well, I would say I'd go as far as to pray that people will listen to what we could try to share to them as much as possible. You and I have moved on, thank God. But I think that I would like the aftermath people to understand that it's one thing to give them shelter in a car and whatever, but you better be prepared to, try and offer them something that is a bit more long-lasting in their own mind.
Letta Remini said in Troublemaker, you can take the girl out of Scientology, but you can't take Scientology out of the girl. And really my offer to her before Aftermath first aired was to take Scientology out of the girl. I wasn't suggesting that I'd be paid for it. I wasn't saying I need to be on television made famous. I was reaching out to her and saying, maybe I could help you. But my experience in that way has been, when Nicole Kidman, when she left, her dad read Piece of Blue Sky and let it be known to me that he'd read it and he thought it was a great book. And I sort of thought, well, why doesn't she pick up the phone and call me? And seeing somebody who, as I say, spent 20 years simmering, and that it took one afternoon to open that up and say, no, it's just not true. You've been deceived.
Well, I think Katie Holmes, a case in point. Or at least Katie Holmes had enough family support and enough savvy to spend a year getting ready to go and going. It made me laugh because I used to wear this Free Katie t-shirt in East Grinstead. So I'm thinking, well, that was a good thing. But I think that, I think we can do what we can do, but somebody needs to wake up and take note of the fact that if all these people are departing, they're going to need help at some point.
Well, I did do some estimates. So I did try and work out how many people had been involved. And I think my view of membership is accurate. They've only once ever internally published real numbers. And that was back in the 80s. And I have the colour glossy leaflet where they show you a graph. Our friend Johnny Jacobson has done an excellent of the membership. And he has published this document, which says they claim 25,000 paid up members of the International Association of Scientologists. And that was, it was about 1987. That year, they also published an advertisement telling their members to buy Road to Total Freedom, and they said if you buy this many copies of it, if every member of the IAS bought this many copies of it, it would go platinum. And if you did the numbers and worked it back, you got the 25,000 again. So that time they were claiming somewhere between 8 and 11 million members, because they count the body thetans too, of course.
Yeah.
But even if you look at the figures, I would say we know that Dianetics, before the publisher withdrew it because it was fraudulent at Hermitage House in 1950, it had sold 150,000 copies. It's estimated by publishers that each book published is read by 2.5 people.
Yeah.
I'm not sure who the half people are, but
I don't know.
so therefore you've got 375,000 readers.
Yeah.
I think that if you added everything together, everybody who's ever had an auditing session, everybody who's ever, read some of it and tried to do some of it, we do get into the millions. And most of those people will probably have suffered no effect whatsoever from what happened to them. But I would say that there are at least 250,000 people in the world who have been affected directly by their involvement with Scientology, and who will carry on deceiving themselves about the benefits of this. They'll carry on, you get the next level, which is where they've sorted out the loaded language, the words, and said, I don't talk about the overt motivator sequence anymore.
Yeah.
They now talk about karma. They don't talk about past lives, they talk about reincarnation.
Yeah.
And they just move over without studying the roots of these ideas, without knowing who the lords of karma are, for example. What are they called? The something or other records, the Akashic records, which are the records of karma. They've got no idea of the Hindu and Buddhist notions of these things. And so the concepts remain in place, even though the words have not, are no longer used. Concepts remain in place.
And they try to associate with other former members, and then the infighting begins.
Yes.
I think it was quite beneficial that I didn't have anyone around to associate with except yourself, and that worked out well. So maybe it's got to be one-on-one, but I think
so. I wrote a lot of stuff for Tony Ortega's wonderful Underground Bunker, and I got to the point where I said, I've said it now. I've written 7.
I'm done with that now.
I've written these papers. Read Blue Sky. Read Never Believe a Hypnotist. Watch the Toronto Getting Clear, and we're done. If that doesn't sort things out for you, then we have to go somewhere else. But the problem is that you have to enable people to think. And that's a problem in our world, and that authoritarian systems are ways of preventing people from thinking. So, you get this concept of gatekeeping, whereby the information that somebody can have, what Steve Hassan calls information control, is limited. But the one that bothers me is self-gatekeeping, where somebody says, I cannot communicate about that.
I don't want to talk about it.
What's he going to do? Is he going to bite you if you talk about it?
Absolutely.
I might become possessed by devils, or something horrible happened to me. And you go, well, you're still in the child position now. With regard to your own mind, you're not in charge of it. You should be able to hear anything. You should be able to, and then listen to it. But as you say, and this is probably a good point to end off, because I think we need to talk about recovery in more depth. And probably if we close down, is there anything else about baby watching that, there was the other case we had with the young East German woman whose mother had got her into Scientology, written a great long manuscript about what was wrong with Scientology, sadly in German, and then killed herself.
So, I remember that. Yes.
The amount of cases that we saw, and when we put it to that young woman that, the fair game law, this thing about tricking and lying and suing and destroying, showed her that, and she was the first person I'd showed it to who said, well, yeah, you have to do that to suppressives. No.
Whoa. I remember Was that the one where the Scientologists confronted me in the street and tried to take me to St. Hill because they thought I was the victim?
Yes,
Of
and
this
we had 2
program.
cameramen, and
That was funny.
and that was what persuaded her that actually she wasn't totally sure about what.
Yeah, they were very helpful.
And then
I
she
think
saw
it was
the
the
harassment
black
thing.
boots. I think it was the black boots and
Oh,
telling
the Jack
to give
boots
me,
was
yeah.
a favorite aspect of Kathy Spruill's attire.
Yeah.
But yeah, and
I think we should talk about recovery because
let's talk about it separately. Let's
sure, another time.
let's end off this one.
Yeah.
While people are still tolerating us, and we'll,
unless they're like the mouse in the teapot in Alice and they're going to sleep, the dormouse goes to sleep during the dinner party. But hey, wake up. Well, also, I think we need to think about the fact that we can't hold out a whole lot of hope for this, but if anyone ever decided to release the captives within the Sea Org, that's a whole nother ballgame.
Yeah, I mean, that was what was worrying me in 2013. I had some trepidation, having gone, silent publicly in 1996, though I continued to help with your court case and a few other things, where child abuse was involved or what have you. I've always been willing to help. But, it had become, how it was, we suffered an incredible amount of harassment. So when in 2013 I started speaking out again, I was very worried about
sure.
But the problem I'd seen was that sooner or later it's going to explode. And the people I'm most concerned about are the current sea organizations.
Absolutely.
And there is, we have so much bickering out there and so much, internecine warfare.
Well, here's a positive note for you. You'll love this. Our beloved leaflet, What the Scientologists Don't Tell You. Well, I had a phone call from a lady in Florida. Her name is Debbie Maxwell. Oh. She's a Christian, and she has a real heart for them. So people contact her with messages for their family, and she makes signs and parks her car outside flag, and here's a message from mom, or you've got a niece, or she does all these things with the messages, and then she passes out gospel things. But she said, Bonnie, I'd like to pass out some truth. Do you have any truth? And I said, she read Deceived, and she said, oh, she said, is there anything like this? I said, well, Deceived is the ultimate chapter. I said, but there is a smaller leaflet. So they pass them out quite regularly in Clearwater. And who, above all people, should get very upset but Peter Mansell. Because Peter is now in charge of stopping Debbie doing that sort of thing. Especially when they have an open night. I think they have these things like parties on the street or something. So Debbie gets some friends and off they go to the party to pass out What the Scientologists Don't Tell You. And when she wanted to pass it out, I think she changed the line in. I got very incensed. I said, no. Sacred scripture, no. I said that's a very important line. Let's not change that one. But I think it's interesting that 26 years later, Peter Mansell is confronting What the Scientologists Don't Tell You leaflet in the streets of Clearwater. So that's brilliant. And they wait for them to come off the bus, and they leave it placed. They're just really good at carrying on and on and on.
Yeah.
And they really care about it, and they're delighted to have that leaflet. So kudos, my friend.
Oh, thank you. It was a long time ago, but it I mean, we talked about
it. Doesn't change.
all of the things in that leaflet remain true. And
we have to keep Scientology working.
Yeah.
Badly. Yeah.
I'd forgotten that, of course, the chapter in Deceived I drafted for you about.
Yeah, exactly. But I'm the one with the undertaking that can't be printed that says I can talk about and publish anything that we put into discovery which at one point took, do you know, one point Allen and Overy had, I don't know, 7 rooms or something. But at one point they moved to a more beautiful premises, and they said, Bonnie, how much of this do you want? So I went up and sat in these secure rooms because they had problems with security on that material, even from within Allen and Overy. And so I know exactly how much was in discovery. I have a very good legal idea. And I love the idea that I can publish for myself or for someone else if it falls under my remit.
And then first of all, of course, that means the leaflet itself. And
Absolutely.
It's safe now to disclose that, curiously, they never sued me, but I wrote it.
And Peter was irate, going, it's not true, it's not true. And Debbie said, we think it's true.
Yeah. There's nothing in there
they can protest, but they can't actually do anything about it. I mean, they could try.
But you see the deception involved that I think Julia Lewis and various other people were asked about the contents of OT3 in an interview, and they all said it's not true. There is no Xeno, there are no body thetans. You're going, well, is that an acceptable truth? Which kind of,
you really would.
Not a harmful lie. Hubbard said that, there's strange.
Yeah. So straight, who knows how far that little leaflet could travel.
Yeah, well, I mean, it worked in closing down the Dianetics shop. It worked in closing the Chichester mission. Within weeks, because they cannot recruit if that leaflet's being handed out to potential recruits. And of course, the poor body router, the person doing the recruiting, then has to pay double for everything they do because they have to have a Class 8 auditor. So they'll be told, oh no, there's nothing true in there, but from now on, your auditing is going to cost double. And I always felt that was a good thing, because that would at least slow that person down so that they'd be able to do less to them. But so it goes. Yeah. Anyway, it's been fantastic as usual.
Oh well, as always.
And we'll talk about recovery in some depth.
Okay, that'll be fun. Yeah. That will be light and lovely. And I know we've been very serious this afternoon, but I just hope and pray that someone hears something they need to hear.
Yes, it'd be good to be useful.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And, let's hope that one day we are. Grand. It's been wonderful talking to you, Bonnie.
You too, my love.
Thank you.
Yeah. Bye-bye.